may be something to do with, depending on various elements to the story, depending on what's going on, some things can vary. However, not all things. Some people, they use that like an excuse. They don't know what's really going on. They don't know what's really taking place. They try to act like they do. They even create a bunch of distortions, make things up, and in doing so, mess up a bunch of processes, shift their blame or their problems onto somebody else and try to blame them. Now, what some of these groups are doing is they're literally copying people where it doesn't make sense for them to do, versus people that are copying and they're doing something in terms of something that is making sense, something that is going in a true direction, something that they can copy, versus things that are basically not making sense, not going in the flow of things, copying and just basically falling apart. And they don't want that to be known. They want to make things seem like I'm biased supposedly, and that's not true, because everything I've done, everything makes sense in general, and that's what they possibly try to do. They try to mix things up, try to mess things in a different way, where then they can introduce things and then possibly things fit in their narrative, and then they can be able to justify their wrongdoings or their playouts in terms of what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish with their lack of understanding playouts or thoughts or ideas, because what they believed has nothing to do with reality at all. What they believed has to do with them just trying to prove a point and them just trying to be right, not what is realistically true, not what is right. So they're basically not going in the flow of that type of stuff. They're basically going against that type of stuff. And they're having some major, very, very harmful effects on me. They're having very, very harmful effects on people. They're having very, very harmful effects on the planet. They're basically not allowing something to be. So that's dangerous. They're not allowing something to be. They've done this for such a long time now that, and they've been warned. They've been warned. They're obviously aware. They're ignoring things. They're taking turns doing this type of stuff. There's people that are basically making sense in whatever they're doing. Everything's lining up, everything's adding up, everything's making sense. And then there are people that are doing everything and things are just not lining up, things are not adding up, things are not making sense. This is a mimic, a copy of something that makes sense. And something goes in a backwardly, in a left, right, forwardly, different types of directions, where something is basically lost, something is confused, then they're infecting a bunch of people. They're doing the same thing to other people, making them feel a certain way. They're being allowed to do this type of stuff. They're basically taking turns to try to undermine things, their narrative, their measurements, their wrongful justifications, where, of course, something is not justified. That doesn't make something justified if something is wrong, if something is not making sense. Now, don't get me wrong, just like a definition of force or anything for that matter, there's different types of wrongdoings, there's different types of forces, there's different types of things that make sense, may make sense with something else, may not make sense with something else, may make sense with another thing. There's a thing where something is not just, doesn't make sense, will make sense possibly later, given the elements to the story. These groups, what they're doing is they're taking what I'm saying, they're hearing what I'm saying, they're acting like they don't know, they're adapting to something, they're trying to copy something, they don't really entirely understand what they're copying. They're not really true in terms of all the true things that they can be or partake in. They're trying to give reflections back, however, the reflections are not adding up, making sense. So, in other words, what's going on is a lot of nonsense things in reality, where people are basically trying to blame, and then they're, of course, getting a natural reflection back of what they're trying to do, because they don't understand. They're not including the elements to the story. They're not understanding how everything happened, and they're basically listening to a bunch of liars. And what they're doing is going with a certain wave and not putting things together where things belong. However, forcing things in weird ways where things are not realistically making sense, you know? And so then they're basically trying to flip the script and saying, well, other people are not making sense either. That's why they're doing the same thing. You know, there's people that are making much more sense based on totality of who they are and what's occurred. And then there's people that are not making sense in the totality of who they are and what occurred. Because, you know, a person like me, for instance, is not a harm causer. I don't go around and cause harm to these people, you know? What they do is they go around and cause harm to people. Again, you know, depending on whom, depending on what exactly what's going on, there may be a just, less just, and not just. And depending on the elements to a story, the not just in time may or may not be just later on, or maybe less just later on, or may not be just at all, may be the same exact thing, that something is always the same exact thing. So, you know, with awareness, I know from my aspect of reality, in general, people are aware of me. And then the nonsense thing in terms of me not bringing things to awareness the way I'm doing things like this, because a lot of things don't make sense for me to talk about on video, don't make sense for me to talk about on other aspects of reality and how I'm perceiving everything. People are not basically ignoring things. They're in their minds they're correct. In my mind, they're not correct. The majority of people are aware. In their mind, makes sense for them to basically be aware and then introduce a bunch of nonsense like scenarios. While I know that they're aware, they're trying to understand how I work. They're trying to understand how truth works. They can't. No, never. No matter how close they arrive, they're always going to get further and further from the truth. Because that's the nature of truth. You can never understand truth unless you are truth. If they try to understand truth and they do so in a wrongful way, then there's basically different types of karmic things that are occurring and different types of consequences that people are doing simply because they know not to do something in a wrongful way, and yet in their minds they just want to do something just to get something over with and try to prove a bunch of stuff. And their level of understanding is in damages. They're causing in damages. They're making paving way for a bunch of damages to occur. They're basically um, not realistically understanding something in the way something is supposed to realistically be understood. These groups, these playouts, there's things that are making sense in them. There's things that are making less sense in them. There's things that are not making sense at all in them. There's just, not just, and less just in whatever they're doing. They're mixing themselves with different types of groups, whether they're trying to be exposed, whether they're trying to be caught, whether they're not trying to be caught or exposed. I don't know. I think whatever they can try to get away with, they'll try to get away with. Again, depending on if something is true, depending on if something is making sense, depending on if something is going in a true direction. That's the most important thing, whether something makes sense, something doesn't make sense. So there's a lot to the story in terms of all these things that people are doing. They don't know what they're doing, yet they're not allowing something that does know what they're doing to do something in the correct and true way. So this is what I've been dealing with in many aspects of reality. A lot of weird predicaments in terms of me not being able to do what I need to do, and what is the need of me to do, and what is the need of many, many people to do, simply because of a bunch of liars that are going in people's lives, messing and tampering a lot of processes, and in doing so, not being uh, the way something is supposed to be. In other words, they're being something that something is not supposed to be, and they're trying to, blame instead of trying to understand a bunch of stuff. And then when they're doing this type of stuff, because they're the antagonists, they're hearing this type of stuff from me, all this type of stuff from me. Then they want to say like the same thing. In other words, they're logical. They're not making sense. Versus me, that is making sense in whatever I'm doing. Literally, not because I say so, because that's how things are. I can't, put into other words for you in terms of there's water that makes sense, and there's Coke with water that's trying to pass lies for truth, and they're trying to shift blame on flip the script on the water, saying the water doesn't make sense, and not allowing the water to be the way something is supposed to be. So they're basically lost and confused, and they want to infect me with their lost and confusion, even though they may act like that's not what's going on. That is what's going on. They don't even know what they're doing. They're just doing something just to do something, seems like. They have to get their purpose of what the truth is, because I'm saying things based on my perspective, based on my experience, based on me being true, based on patterns, based on me understanding what they're up to, what they're involved in. And I'm experiencing a bunch of sneaky stuff that people are doing, harmful stuff that people are doing, not listening, going against. And this type of stuff that they're doing is dangerous, and they're basically trying to do everything to shift their blame on everybody else except themselves. Where something may make sense depending on who's doing that, and something may not make sense depending on who's doing that. That each of them is different. Similar to a person, because all this is because of elements, the taste, the color, the scent, the taste bud of the person, and how something looks, and how something was possibly grown. Whatever anything may be, this all depends on the elements of the story, based on beliefs, based on understandings, based on influences, based on effects, based on experiences, based on perception. And the problem is in different aspects of reality, depending on who somebody may be, things may make sense in terms of what people are doing. In various aspects of reality, everything, no matter what I do, will make sense too. However, will make sense in general based to true beings. Will not realistically make sense in whatever I'm doing to beings that are basically going against me or going against truth, because they're basically taking something, misunderstanding something, not being something and how something is supposed to be, and they're basically going against something in this more nonsense like way versus majority of sense like way. So yes, this planet, the nature of this planet is true. Because of the corruption, because of the manipulation, because of the mixes and everything all over the place, this planet basically is always trying to go back, always, no matter what occurs in this planet, the planet is always trying to go back to the truth. The planet is always striving to return back to the planet and who the planet is, how the planet is, and why the planet is. And so the planet in its very nature is literally truth, is absolute truth, is infinite truth, and is literally returning, trying to do every single thing in every single minute, every single second, every single day, every single week, every single month, every single year. What the planet is trying to do, and all true beings are trying to do, is return back to their true nature. Animals, humans, aliens, nature, birds, bugs, different types of species of mammals, vertebrae, things that I don't mention. Every single life form in general, insects, all the reptiles, all these things are basically the purpose of every single being in general. If people are not understanding something, the whole purpose of every single thing is basically to return back to the true nature of something, return back to the original self of how something is supposed to be, not how something is. So what's going on is, while I'm doing a bunch of stuff, what some people are doing is they're doing weird waves, they're doing weird playouts, they're taking credit for a bunch of stuff, where something is in the midst where they can take credit for possibly, and they're trying to take credit for everything else, not allowing something genuine to be. So what I'm mentioning is, I'm not mentioning something new. I've mentioned before in terms of what I'm doing, what I'm saying. It's just a bunch of people, I don't want to know a bunch of stuff because they're basically misusing a bunch of stuff. So a lot of people, they have to know specifications and not everything, simply because it doesn't make sense for them to know everything, because their choices and their decisions are wrong, incorrect, not how something is supposed to be. So going back to what I was saying regarding everything going back to the true nature, that's what the planet, that's what nature is always trying to do, going back to is true nature. And notice how I'm mentioning one thing and I'm going to another thing and I'm going to another thing. That's also for a purpose too. And I'll explain the type of stuff later in terms of why I'm doing that. And this has to do with also the mixes. This also has to do with people not understanding something, and so something is basically hidden. Something is not the way something is supposed to be. Whether something is going to be hidden, whether something is going to return back to their true nature, in terms of how something is supposed to be, is not up to one person or one thing to decide. That's just a matter of the totality of all things and how all things are basically being or moving or transitioning in the totality of all things based on choices and decisions that people are making. So the planet and all beings, the nature is to always return back to their true nature. The problem is, in the midst, there's a bunch of people not knowing who they are, going against everything, messing a bunch of stuff up in the process, and literally something that they're seeing is, oh yeah, something is a big deal. It's not a big deal at all. It's realistically a very, very tiny glimpse, a scratching the surface of something, versus a need, versus the difference that they have yet to understand, they have yet to realize. And these groups are basically um, dangerous for me, to beings, to the planet, because they're not allowing the difference to be seen. They're too naive. They're too egotistical. They're continuously going against something. And I've mentioned this before. This is not the first time I'm mentioning this. And they're not allowing the difference to be seen in terms of what is a need. What I need to do, I am unable to do. I'm doing something in a very, very short, tiny version, tiny aspect of reality that realistically needs to be in a huge aspect of reality. And that has to be established, because these groups are basically saying, oh, look, something is such a big deal because they're operating on a very, very low subconscious level, possibly. So they think something is a huge deal, versus in terms of what it realistically is a need for me to do what I need to do to not only myself, not only towards my family, not only towards humanity in general, however, to all beings in general. And these groups are literally every single day taking turns doing little tiny things, messing a bunch of processes up, and they're thinking that they're basically doing good works with a bunch of damages, with a bunch of lack of understanding. And so they're basically trying to. I just felt the wave. I just felt the wave of nonsense groups. What they're trying to do is they're trying to um, go with a certain narrative to make people believe in this like tiny glimpse where I just felt. Depending on how people are affected, something can be more amplified, something can be less amplified. Somewhere in between, someone's trying to play a narrative that they're basically unaware. They have the capability of being aware. They choose not to be aware, or they choose to go. They choose to basically do other types of playouts in not being aware. Whether they're aware or not aware is irrelevant too, because and depending on what exactly. Because what does matter is I'm doing something for myself. They've tried to condition me like I'm doing something for them. So maybe that's why they're unaware. Because these groups, they've tried to condition people to make people believe that basically everything they do is about them. Okay? I think that's what I just received. Something to do with conditions, something to do with groups that are not making sense, expecting sense, in other words. Okay? So, like I said, I'm a type of person where I make sense and I want to make sense and I want to continue making sense. I don't want to make sense and not make sense. So in the midst, what I'm doing is I'm trying to understand everything before something is a choice or a decision is made. What these groups are doing is messing a bunch of processes up, and similar to a force in a different definition, they're forcing things to occur. So whatever they're getting, except it's not going to work the way something is supposed to work. So they're going to go back to square one again. They're wasting my time. They're wasting somebody else's time. Something is not working the way something is supposed to be. and something is irrelevant because of the wrongful behavior that they're showing me, that they're doing, just to get something over with. See, the influences, the effects, and whatever they're doing, they've had an effect on me to do what I'm doing, except not the way I would be doing things. So, this rush, what they're doing, has to stop. This rush, what they're up to, doesn't add up, doesn't make sense. So the rule of thumb would be to take something in terms of what the answer is, be the answer, and then of course go back to what I've been mentioning, understand what I've been mentioning, and go from step one to step two to step three if people want to do that. At the same time, I know that there's different groups that are doing that, that are doing the other thing, that are holding the story mode and how the story mode works and how everything's supposed to be operating and flowing and going. At the same time, they're doing something in this type of a way where something is just like in this controlled like aspect in terms of what could have happened in the midst. Some people are still partaking in a bunch of forbidden aspects, unfortunately. So then they're basically feeding a bunch of nonsense to occur. So of course, the nonsense and what's occurring is then influencing, just like I was mentioning this morning, and having a weird effect on everything. Influencing and having a weird effect on everything. And another wave I'm feeling at this moment of time is this weird type of wave that doesn't make sense with me. Okay, it's just like this weird um, wave that is not making sense, that is not adding up, that is like a forceful thing. It seems like. Um, so to be honest with you, I don't want to continue. The planet doesn't want to continue. The beings in general don't want to continue. That's what's going on. So these groups and whatever they're doing and whatever they're involved in, they're not allowing something to be. They're not allowing something to be the way something is supposed to be. They're trying to take credit for damages. They're trying to take credit for a bunch of stuff that they don't understand. They don't know what they're doing, and they're not allowing something that does know what they're doing to do something they need to know to do. That's what's going on. So some people may say, "Oh, that's not what's going on," except that is because I'm in alignment with everything. I'm in flow with everything. I know what's going on. They don't know that. Yet they want to flip the script on me. They're not going to know everything. There's 10,000 and 100,000 and a million things that they don't know, and a billion things and a trillion things that they don't know, and they're not going to know. They're not going to know in a wrongful way. Even if they do know, they're not going to be able to make correct, true decisions because they're doing something in a wrongful way. They have to understand any form of thing that is not making sense against truth is wrongful. How do you decide whether something is wrong or correct? You have to judge something based on something being true. Whatever is wrongful and something that is being true is not the answer. That's how you know if something is wrong or right. You have to be true. Anything that is not resonating, not connecting with you and the way something is supposed to be, then you know something is wrong. You have to be true. Not in one aspect of reality, not in two aspects of reality, in the totality of all aspects of reality, essentially how everything has occurred. However, just because a bunch of things occurred on me doesn't equal I'm going with a bunch of things that are not true. I'm filtering everything that is lies out of my life. And I'm basically taking every single thing that is true, and in doing so, I know what is true, what is not true. So a lot of people, because they're not true in the way who they are, this has to do with their soul. This has to do with who they are, like a person, like who they are, not just them being true and eating good food and thinking good thoughts and saying good words. You have to also be true. Your nature has to be true. And if your nature is not true, that equals in time, based on the correct behavior, based on doing everything in the correct way, people can evolve and manifest and be true. Except they cannot do something in a wrongful way and expect different results. Just like I mentioned before. People are harm causers. They're damaging, causing damages. I'm feeling the damages that they're causing. So this is just like a little brief, glimpse of truth, of what truth is and what truth can be. Except I choose not to continue. I choose to wait. I choose for things to take time, for things to make sense, so I can do something in a correct way. Everything is supposed to be in a correct way. Things are not supposed to be in the incorrect way. So the incorrect way is the virus in reality. Of course, going against the nature of truth and going against everything to do with truth and what the truth is. Doesn't matter race, doesn't matter religion, doesn't matter who, in all races, closest to furthest, source energy, nature, and what nature creates, all things good for nature. Animals, humans, aliens, nature, bugs, reptiles, birds, all life forms. The planet is supposed to go back towards all life forms, everything good for the planet. This will take time. This is not going to happen overnight. Um, the most truth, from my understanding, is everything being true, everything understanding each other, everything working out together and working together to make sure ensure that there is a redesignment of everything, there's a coexistence of everything, so everything basically can coexist and flow in time, and then basically return back to where everything belongs. In the process, because a bunch of low vibrational things are going against something that is true, something that is true, something that is the most true, cannot be in the way something is supposed to be. So then, of course, there's different types of choices, decisions, transitions, developments that occur. Hold responsible those, harm causers and whatever they're doing, so that could be stopped, so something can work out correctly, so then something can be again introduced in the picture and how things are supposed to realistically be. So I'm gonna stop this video at this moment of time because I know what the truth is. I know this is a tiny fractal of what the truth is. I know this is in a wrongful way of what the truth is versus something that is an ocean and what is a need. I know the difference, even though some people don't want to see the difference. This is a tiny glimpse of all aspects of reality, what the glimpse should be and what the truth is. So look at the difference. And do yourselves a favor, stop partaking in forbidden aspects.